Good evening. Maestro. Welcome to the Opera Center. My name is Mark Skorka. I'm president of Opera America, and it's delightful to see you all here. As many of you know, September 28th was the first anniversary of the opening of the Opera Center. And in the first year, which was just our startup year, we signed in 30,195 people at the front desk. People coming for auditions, rehearsals, lessons, recording sessions, and public programs like this. So we're on a great track to serve the artistic community generally and the opera community in specific. Thanks for coming, and come back soon. This program, The Creators in Concert, is a reflection of Opera America's fundamental commitment to supporting the creation and production of new opera. Over the last 25 years, we have made grants of more than $12 million to opera companies for the creation and production of new work. This year, we are granting $225,000 in grants for the support of workshops for works that are in progress. And we have a new grant program that we're about to unveil in terms of the grant guidelines. We will be awarding this year 10 $10,000 grants, $100,000 in total, to female composers who are working in opera. And these grants will be direct grants to the individual artists to help advance their work. We're really thrilled about that. At our annual conference in San Francisco in June, we'll have our New Works Sampler, where we perform excerpts of some of the most promising new works. And in January, from January 12th to 15th, we have our New Works Forum, where we'll have more than 75 people in town here at the Opera Center for 3.5 days of discussion about the dynamics of creating new works, with the hope that by bringing artists and producers together, we can increase the likelihood of new works, and through our discussion, increase the chances that they will be successful new works. So again, this is a part of the large commitment that Opera America has to supporting new work. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on the work of Mark Adamo. This program that features excerpts of works from American opera, either new works or works that have been premiered already, and then conversations with the composer so we can learn more about the creative process. After the program, we'll have an informal reception in the lobby where you can join us for a glass of wine and a little snack. This is being live streamed, so we have an international audience watching the program tonight. Welcome. I just regret we can't serve you wine over the internet, but we are working on it here at the Opera Center. But to introduce the program, we have the composer himself. Please join me in welcoming Mark Adamo.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you all for coming. Obviously, I'm thrilled to be part of this this series. I think, gosh, the first time I met Kevin Putz was in this room when we were both doing songs for the songbook for the songbook for Opera America, and then the next thing I knew he had won the Pulitzer for Silent Night. So there's something very special about the room. What we're going to do tonight here are excerpts from actually my newest two pieces, one of which is an opera, The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which was introduced by San Francisco Opera, which had commissioned it and then given its first performances in June of 2013. Then we'll jump back a little bit to 2006. I did an opera in the 2005-2006 season on the Aristophanes Lysistrata, and we'll hear a bit of the second act sequence between the two rival generals. And then actually we're going to conclude the evening with a piece for baritone and string quartet that Tom Sampson and the Jupiter String Quartet commissioned, and was introduced in California at the Mondavi Center in April, and then came to Boston and then to Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center the same week. So it's sort of a premiere of sorts, because two of the pieces from the operas have never been heard before in this particular format. That is, because Aristotle was written for baritone and string quartet, I thought, well, why not, take the opportunity to revisit these pieces that were meant for orchestra, and rather than boil them down to piano, which is fine but not always ideal, why not kind of revisit them for chamber music. And Opera America was game, and here we are. So I guess before we bring on Leah Wool, who will sing the title role of Mary Magdalene, and the Canite Quartet who we're playing, I should tell a little bit about the piece and about the situation of this particular aria. The opera takes the Gnostic Gospels as well as the canonical Gospels and a lot of scholarship around it to essentially imagine an alternate history of the Jesus story through the eyes of its most substantial main character. And so what you have in the very beginning of the piece are 5 disaffected moderns who are from a religious tradition and are somewhat disaffected by it. They love the story. It's given them so much of their moral imaginations and their sense of human possibility, and yet there are certain aspects of it that seem opposed to those very things. And after their particular, not exactly a lament, but almost I guess Jeremiah is the technical term, a prayer to God which is more or less, hey, well, they get not exactly an accusation, but a prayer in the form of a complaint. So they have a very modern Jeremiah, and then they are answered by a larger chorus who says that, in essence, that we can complete the story, and that sets up the terms of the piece in which the discovery of a lot of these alternative scriptures are feeding into this new narrative, and then those 2 choruses become one chorus, and they summon Mary Magdalene into existence, into the imaginations of the people who need her. And the first piece that she sings here is drawn largely from the Song of Songs, because the more I dug into this material, the more I realized that a lot of her portrayal in these Gospels owes at least as much to the goddess Wisdom or the Shulamite in the Song of Songs. Some of these strongly erotic and spiritual personae from the Old Testament, in which Eros and divinity were not opposed but aligned. But the situation in which I placed her is that she is, after she's summoned here, she is singing to a lover through whom she is finding a kind of transcendence, but we are given to believe that he does not exactly feel the same. So I'd like you to welcome Leah Wool and the members of the Canite Quartet. I'd also like to extend a preemptive thanks to Dr. Tim Long, who has been preparing the singers and also going to be our sort of shadow conductor this evening. So, thanks. next singers are going to be Philip Cutlip and William Ferguson, and they are playing Leonidas and Nico, respectively, who are two characters I invented in my adaptation of Lysistrata after the Aristophanes play. I guess, actually, if there's a theme to this entire evening, it's all about kind of revisiting old myths and kind of, I guess as Ashla Carter would put it, putting new wine in old bottles and hoping they explode. So the new wine in this case were two characters who in one way or another are making a pro-war case in the Aristophanes, which does not exist in the original play. The original play, the women are absolutely correct that the war was a mistake. It's been going on for 12 years, enough already. And I thought that was less interesting as a dramatic premise because I thought you want a moment in a drama, sung or spoken, in which no matter who is on stage, you have a reason to believe they're right. So I thought, could I come up with a character who believes that, that virtue lies in defending the country that has given him everything? And so at this particular point, Lycia, whom I've kind of given, she has now become Lysistrata in the course of the play, that is to say, organize the women of Athens and Sparta to organize a moratorium on sex until the men make peace. That has happened. The women are barricaded in the Acropolis, and the two generals, Nico and Leonidas, of Athens and Sparta, respectively, Nico is Lysia's beloved, have banded together to make common cause against their new enemy, their respective spouses. But that the moratorium is taking its toll spiritually and militarily. And so at this particular point, Leonidas, who one is given to believe is a bit more sophisticated, you know, his moralism has been tempered by experience, I suppose, turns to Nico and essentially says, look, this makes no sense really for us to continue in this way. Why don't we relax our principles somewhat and see if we can get out of this situation? And Nico responds with the reason that he believes that continuing in the war was sort of the moral thing to do. And I'm particularly fond of this scene because it was the hardest to write. You know, I've never been someone who was really found. It's my sort of anti-war sentiments have been like all of ours. You know, who wants to kill anyone? So, but for the purposes of the piece, I needed to get into that mind. You know, and so it was kind of a journey for me as well. And I think that you know, in the hands of these performers, you see where they go. So Philip Cutlip, our baritone, is Leonidas. William Ferguson is our tenor. Nico and the Conte quartet return.
Spartans, Athenians, this is absurd! General Nicias, a word. I'm not reflective. That's not my role, not my breed. Give me the rules, give me the tools, give me the goal, and I'm effective. I do quite well, I succeed. Only I've rarely had perspective on the whole. And hell, isn't that what we need? I don't take your point, sir. Too late in the day, sir. Too late for mere obedience. We need another way out of this war. Too late for delay, sir. Too late for be good soldiers anymore. Not anymore. Won't it always be what it's always been, if we always do what we've always done? Blindly we continue what others have begun, blood and bone and sinew, father, brother, son. Even if I win and you win, still, what will we have won? What will we have won? What more can I say, sir? What more? Time to ask the question. Too late in the day, sir. And here is my suggestion, as we tremble on the brink, determined not to blink. Shall we do the thing we've rarely done before?
Think. But I know what you think, sir. I can tell. All my responses faked, feigned, all my convictions tricked, trained, all I believe in plainly explained. Now I know who I am.
General.
Others order me eat, sleep. Others in heaven watch me leap. Look like a ram, act like a sheep, belly a sheep, a lamb. Hear this, general. Hear this question why would I
Piece is kind of a lovely story around it. Thomas Hampson, whom I've been an enormous admirer of forever, occasioned the sort of email that one dreams of getting from one's representative. I opened my account, and Peggy Manostra at Schirmer, who publishes my music, said, Thomas Hampson has a commission for a piece for baritone and string quartet for the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, and was wondering if you would be interested in composing it, and there was no point size large enough on my computer to say yes, yes, anytime, anywhere, you know. And so that was happening for a long time, but it overlapped with the period of composing the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which, as you can imagine, was very absorbing. It's a very big piece. It was 6 years. It's its own story. But I had put aside a certain amount of time to then turn to Tom's piece, and I could not find it. I was going to do my own text. I didn't like anything I'd come up with. I knew what I was looking for, but it seemed so specific that I would never find it among the existing poetry, and essentially got myself into a fine crisis and ended up writing him, I guess, in January, this craven mea culpa. I'm sorry I let you down. I cannot do this. If we can reschedule it, that would be great, but if not, I don't deserve it. I realize in retrospect it was kind of, well, operatic, but, you know, hence, you know, guilty as charged. But I mean, I really was feeling it at the time. And Tom, to his eternal credit, said, look, you just finished this piece, right? Because I had just finished the orchestration and sent it off in November, and he knew that I had the vacation scheduled in January. And he said, so you're going to South America to see the penguins in January? And I said, well, yes. He said, why don't you go? Take a breath, have a drink. If this is still impossible when you get back, do you know, then we'll have to do a plan B. But if it does seem like your head is clear enough, we could, I won't go into all the details, we can manage the rest of the program so that we can extend your deadline really another couple of months. And as loath as I was to say that, because I had been saying, I know I can do this piece, I know I can do this piece. I thought, that's what got me into trouble the last time, but I was so desperate to work with him that I said, I would love to do that. And you know the happy ending of this story. I went on vacation. Vacations are wonderful things. Came back, found the exact text that I had actually looked at, and thought, well, the problem with it is that it's telling the experience of the narrator is going on but not really filling in what's happening emotionally. And once I realized that was the great thing about the poem, rather than a problem, it became this unambiguously positive experience. I wrote it very fluently. He loved it, the quartet loved it, we rehearsed it like a dream. It was thrilling. Anyway, the poem is Aristotle, who's not the author, but the subject is, the poet is Billy Collins, our great former poet laureate and one of the great souls. And it's really a meditation, if you will, on beginnings, middles, and endings. You know, this is the beginning, almost anything can happen, and then there's a whole stream of consciousness, skein, if you will, of images, beginnings, and the same thing with the middle and the end, which has a glancing relationship to Aristotle's theory of poetics, you know. And the thing is that there are certain images are visited and then are returned to at certain different stages. So we see mountain climbers putting on their socks and then getting trapped at a ledge, and then we see what happens to them later. But it did so once it occurred to me that if there was a way of making a kind of drama, of building in the sort of emotional peaks and valleys, that the poem, is very careful not to spell out for you, that I could have the makings of something that would be really extraordinary for the baritone as well as the string quartet, because I wanted it to be, kind of the same thing. I wanted it to be as satisfying from a chamber music point of view as from a dramatic point of view. And so he and the Jupiters gave the premiere, as I mentioned, at the Mondavi Center in California, and then it came here to Tully, I guess, this past April. And here to give their beautiful version of it, again, Philip Cutlip and the Caniti.
Beginning, almost anything can happen. This is where you find the creation of light. A fish wriggling onto land, the first word of paradise lost on an empty page. Think of an egg, the letter A woman ironing on a vestige as the heavy curtain rises. This is the beginning. This is the very beginning. The first person narrator introduces himself, tells us about his lineage. The mezzo-soprano stands in the wings. The climbers are studying a map or pulling on their long woolen socks. This is early on, years before the ark The profile of an animal is being smeared on the wall of a cave, and you have not yet learned to crawl. This is the opening, the gambit, the pawn moving forward an inch. This is your first night with her, your first night without her. This is the first part where the wheels begin to turn, where the elevator begins its ascent before the doors latch apart. have sprouted up along the rivers, teeming with people that cross professors. A million schemes, a million wild looks. Disappointment on shoulders, his knapsack here, and pitches his ragged tent. It is the sticky pot where the plot congeals, where the action suddenly reverses, or swerves off in an outrageous direction. Here the narrator devotes a long paragraph to why Miriam does not want Edgar's child. Someone hides a letter under a pillow. Here the aria rises to a pitch, a song of betrayal. Salted with revenge, and the climbing party is stuck on a ledge, halfway up a mountain. This is the bridge, the painful modulation. This is the stick of things, so much is crowded into the middle. The guitars of Spain, eyes of ripe avocados, Russian uniforms, noisy parties, lakeside kisses, arguments heard through a wall. Too much to name, too much to think about. And this is the end. The car running out of road, the river losing touching the white electronic line. This is the end. This is the colophon, the last elephant in the parade, the empty wheelchair, and pigeons floating, the stage is littered with bodies. The narrator leads the characters to their cells, and the climbers are in their graves. It is me hitting the period, and you closing the book. It is Sylvia Plath in the kitchen, and Saint Clement with an anchor around his neck. This is the final bit, fading away to nothing. This is the end, according to Aristotle, that we have all been waiting for, that everyone comes down to the destination we cannot help imagining. A streak of light in the sky, a hat on a peg, and outside the cabin, falling leaves.
2 singers out for sort of a company bow? Honestly, we've been working madly for the past couple of days to put this together, and they've really been heroic. So can Leah and William join us, or are they out in the house, or we'll bow for you? Leah Wool. And also our conductor, Tim Long, really.
We are going to do a little stage set change.
Okay.
Very quickly here, in front of your very eyes. It's like an HD intermission feature at the Met. They're going to bring out a table with some water, because that last piece left lots of people breathless. That was just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And what a privilege to hear it in the Opera Center. We don't often hear string quartets in here, so it's just beautiful to hear the sonority.
It's a beautiful room for it, isn't it?
It sounded great, really great. Thank you so much. Got it. Mark, who brought you to your first opera?
Well, myself, actually, only because, and my first live opera, that's true too. It's been a lonely life.
As opposed to your first dead opera. What was your first live opera?
My first live opera was, ironically, a city opera on tour with Bohème, which had come to D.C. But I had listened to a lot of opera on television as a child, and it's curious, really, that my career has taken me where it has, because I don't recall loving it. I recall loving certain aspects of it. There was a telecast of Birgit Nielsen as Electra, just coming in at a rather high level. And I guess that there must have been a telecast of Sills, I think, as in Daughter of the Regiment. There was a telecast of Dialogues of the Carmelites. Mm-hmm. This is later on with, I believe, Jesse Norman, mm-hmm. Was the mayor, and it might have been Maria Ewing,
yes.
Was the Blanche. And it's kind of curious now when I look back on what troubled me then, because I thought, why are they overacting so grotesquely? The camera is right there, because I had no sense. I hadn't gone to a lot of live theater at that point. And I remember loving the intensity of the music and yet being put off by what seemed to me on television the artifice of certain ways of making music or using the voice. And then it was actually hearing it in the room, hearing Bohème in the room, and of course it makes sense, doesn't it?
And it's funny that you reference the theatricality of opera in the room versus mm-hmm. on television. Your first, one of your early, if not first, awards was as a playwright.
Yes.
So were you thinking about pursuing a career in the theater before opera grabbed hold?
Well, I was thinking of, what I now realize was I was thinking of doing the sort of opera that you could only do on Broadway. I had grown up with, the theater, both sung and spoken, but the musicals to which I found myself gravitating more and more were the musicals roughly between, say, Sweeney Todd in 79, stretching back to Showboat. Those kind of quasi-operatic, mm-hmm. Generally very music-heavy, often, if not completely eclectic, using as much of the acoustically organized voice mm-hmm. as the more traditional Broadway interpreters. I mean, if you look at a little night music, you don't necessarily want an operatic voice as Desiree, but you sure as hell want for Carl Magnus, or for Anne. And the same thing you don't want a more conventional operatic voice for Sport and Life, but Porgy and Bess, mm-hmm. obviously mm-hmm. for those voices. And it never seemed to me that there was that much of a difference between that kind of Broadway thinking and operatic thinking, and I didn't really, I didn't have a piano before I was 16. So it occurred to me that it was the better part of prudence to sort of tailor my musical ambitions to what I thought might be doable. Because
your BA is in composition.
Right.
And was that the composer who might have written these Zwischenfach pieces, or were you already going in the classical direction?
That was the idea. I had started my degree at NYU as a playwright they didn't allow double majors, but I kind of cobbled one together. And then, for various reasons, I left New York before the completion of that, but not before the Paulette Goddard Remark Scholarship for undergraduate playwriting. And then I was in DC and essentially tried to do the reverse. I wanted to get a bachelor's degree in composition, but I was still doing theater because the goal was to be overqualified to work with Jonathan Tunick, the Broadway orchestrator. So essentially not to be in the room and not say, well, why can't the violin play low F sharp? Because I still didn't have, well, confidence, I suppose, is the most succinct way of putting it. I just didn't think of myself in those terms, except that when I got into the degree, everything that a composer did, I loved doing. So I did all of the exercises in the orchestration book like 2 months ahead at the end of the semester because I loved doing it. And the same thing with the counterpoint. It was very conservative in the best sense music department at the Catholic University. It was all very kind of old school. You did 18th century species counterpoint and 15th century species counterpoint. It was, and I loved it, but it still seemed to me that that's not what I'm going to do, because that's what the composer does. And I thought of myself as a songwriter with compositional skills. But over the course of that degree, it shifted a little bit, not least because after I graduated, I started getting commissions, by people whom I would have thought would know better. People. I promise you this. We did my big senior recital at the church at which I was an undistinguished but largely in tune tenor section leader, and I did ironically actually a piece, a setting of I haven't continued with it, but an early setting of Tennessee Williams poetry for soprano and string quartet, and some other things. And there were some players from the National Symphony, both in the ensemble and in the audience, and asked me for a couple of chamber pieces. Because
it is so remarkable for a young composer to be asked for commissions at that point in your...
Oh, yeah, I know. I thought they were kidding. I really did. I mean, and the piece that led to Little Women, I didn't start work on because when the conductor of Eclipse Chamber Orchestra, which was then the unofficial and now the official chamber orchestra of the National Symphony in Washington, heard the chamber pieces that resulted from that recital and said, we'd like an orchestral piece from you. I thought she was kidding. And I told my then partner that Sylvia has asked me for a piece. And he said, how great. And I said, well, that's her way of saying I really liked her bassoon trio. I mean, and it was only until she called me 6 months later and said, we're kind of putting out the program and we haven't heard from you. And I was gobsmacked, honestly. I just it could not occur to me.
Wow.
Because every composer in Washington wanted to work for Eclipse. So it was the best, chamber orchestra by far that had hit the scene. And it really was astounding.
What a remarkable path. Now, the subject matter of your work is vast, and from classical literature to fiction, it's just a really remarkable spectrum of subject matter that you treat in your work. And I was up in Montreal last week for the meeting of the International Artist Manager Association, and I had to lead their opening session. And I asked the panelists how they learn. What is it that they do? What's the personal practice that they follow that leads them to discovery, artistic discovery or professional discovery? And I'm fascinated by your searching for the poem for the Thomas Hampson Commission. How do you, Mark Adamo, live your life so that you encounter works that inspire you? Are you a voracious reader? Do you count on friends to put stuff in front of you?
No, it's reading mostly, I think, and kind of following subjects where they lead. But I think one thing that's very powerful is at least I am always driven to look at the opposite of the thing I just did. So Little Women, which is actually not my idea, it was the idea of the person who was to commission it and then did not. That's a long story. But after that piece, I was very proud of that piece, but it was very small in scale, domestic, naturalistic, adolescent, somewhat pastel coming-of-age story. And after you do that, you want bright colors and something that is absolutely intrinsically theatrical to its bones, and erotic and swaggering and touched with fantasy. And I had that idea in my head before I settled on Lysistrata, although I had read the play first, and again, kind of like Aristotle, what first seemed to me a problem later turned into the opportunity to maybe.
You read the play first because you just read plays for fun, or you read the play on a quest for something to inspire you?
Well, I remember the play. I mean, because I'd read Little Women as a child too, but had something of an interest in mythology and ancient Greek theater, and so yes, that was something that I was familiar with. But then when I went back to it, I thought it's all plot and no character. There's nothing really at stake for you. There's the kind of high spirits and the sexual strutting that I thought would be terrific as a style. But unless something, unless there's an ache that you can locate, in the characters, it's going to seem like special effects. And it was really the character of Nico that gave me that. What if you have, if you can complicate, the political certitude of the Lysistrata figure on the one hand, with some personal motives that may or may not be entirely altruistic, and you can complicate what seems to be just a kind of public, civic, boosterist, rah-rah argument on the part of the men, and have some conception of loyalty and of virtue mixed there. Well, then you have a drama. You have a drama in a very different style from Little Women, but because that I think is constant, certainly in my work for the Opera House, that it has to be rooted in some kind of deep character problem that I would be troubled by in that situation, that is not resolved.
And you don't shy away from work or sonorities, even as we heard in the piece that was just performed, that do tug at the emotions. For you, emotionalism is not a bourgeois 20th century experience in the opera house.
No, well, the joke I always tell is everything I learned about opera I learned from my Italian-American family, except for orchestration. Because we were a rather fractious family and a very passionate family. I mean, we argued deeply and then reconciled even more so. But there was never a disjunction in my family between passionate feeling, deep feeling, and clear thought. Indeed, they sharpened each other, and so I'm always a little bewildered when you hear people talk about the intrinsic artifice of opera, or that opera can deal with emotion and not thought, or that it can deal with emotion as mediated by stories long ago and far away and not now, because I don't think that the songwriters who are working for Adele say, oh my God, the problem of singing feelings with the artifice of a microphone and 24. I don't think that people in the rest of the world where the people live, singing very serious things. I mean, the career of Bob Dylan would be inconceivable if you take out the serious political concerns that undergird that musical herb.
Well, and I always, Mark refers to his Italian-American upbringing, but he spells his name M-A-R-K, which always is just puzzled me.
That's true, actually. I know, well, you're going to see, although, well, there is, actually, on my father's side, it was half Italian and then 1/4 German.
Okay,
and 1/4
that explains it.
So,
now, when we think, it's the German, when we think of great composer librettist teams, we think of Mozart, Da Ponte, Verdi, Boiato, Strauss, Hofmannsthal, Wagner, and Adamo. Because you write your libretti. Do you ever imagine working with a collaborative librettist and someone other than yourself?
I do. But what would be, I think, interesting to me is to find a writer or an approach that I could not feel that I would do. I would sort of want to write someone who would take me into a completely different place otherwise, because if I felt like I was writing, I think it would be unfair to a librettist if I were working with someone and said, well, but that's, but I can do this. And there is a way in which, having had this kind of strangely bifurcated education and sensibility, I don't find writing the libretto a chore and the score a delight, or vice versa. They just seem to me, in many ways, differing ways into the same, problem or approach. It has not yet occurred to me to write to another person's libretto. That said, one of the delights of doing this piece of Aristotle was to try to get into the head and the sound and the rhythmic approach of Billy Collins, because it was not me, and the delight of hearing the piece once it was done is to hear there were certain things that I have done before and certain things that I had to invent or figure out new ways of doing because the language was not mine. So to that extent, as a journey of sensibility, I think would be great.
In the interview that we did with you when we made the video tribute to Carlisle Floyd when he won the NEA Opera Honors Award, you admired him for the amount of coaching and his generosity to the next generation and the next generation after that of composers. Have you begun to coach, teach, guide?
Well, American Lyric Theater, actually. There's a workshop that I run. American Lyric Theater is, I don't know if you know, it's a beautiful organization in town. I think 6 or 7 years standing at this point. And the uniqueness is that it started both as a support organization for opera companies that were specifically workshopping new pieces, so that it did not go from first draft to premiere and people said, well, gosh, had we only another month or so or some preliminary readings to take a look at it, it might have come to its full potential. But its other pedagogical wing, if you will, is to be the equivalent of the young artist programs that have produced so many young singers, have kind of burnished them from grad school to Met debut, which there doesn't really exist an equivalent to for composers. We go from grad school to to the great world. Yes, I mean, and that's terrific if it works, but I think that there are composers. Composing for the theater is not quite like composing a string quartet. There are things that overlap and things that do not. And the very thing that you talk about, the challenge of collaborating with another artist, is its own world. So I teach a little bit. It's a workshop. We call it sort of Gestus, which I thought I had made up, but it was actually Busoni's term for the very same thing. The sort of organizing a way of outlining and then creating a small opera based not so much on here's the design of language, let's underscore it, or here's the symphony, let's kind of stud words into it like cloves on a ham, but let's find out what the gesture is of the dance, if you will, of the actor acting what's important about the narrative, and see how we can refine that and what suggests both the music and the language to go to that third thing, so you don't feel like it's one art form or the other is dragging the other in its wake. And so that's what I've been doing.
I'm so glad that you're working, and I know from firsthand that the works that come out of ALT are really interesting, good work. So congratulations on that process. Mark is one of my favorite people to talk to for obvious reasons. We're going to have a little reception out in the lobby, but please join me in thanking Mark, and then please go back and greet him personally.
Thank you
so much.
Glad you guys enjoyed it, as always. No, it's a pleasure. Those are